Yes.
How did you first encounter Mrs. Coulter? Was it the script, Jack Thorne's script, or was it the book first?
It was the book first, I think. I mean, it was quite about 4 years ago, but I hadn't read the book when I was a child. So Jane and Dan came to me and asked me to play Mrs. Coulter, but I hadn't read the book. So I went to the book straight away and started reading it. And actually, I've just been rereading it for this session, and it's extraordinary. And the way she's introduced is as a mystery, this glamorous, beautiful, mysterious, alluring woman, covered in fur, but also of the Arctic, goes to the Arctic. She's an explorer. She's very intoxicating. So that's how I first really came upon her, was reading the books and reading the novels. I think with Mrs. Coulter, it was so obvious that her image was everything. It was all about her first appearances, her impressions, the way she walks into a room and who she's trying to manipulate. And that was very key to her. It's all very contrived and well thought out. And so I knew that I knew the image was going to be vital to who she was. And she was both a sort of fairy godmother to the children. She needed to attract kids and be sort of soft and gentle. He talks about having a gentle voice and a musical, sweet voice. But also then she also had to attract or intimidate men and intimidate women and men and everyone else. So there was a lovely combination of her being sort of fairy godmother and the wicked stepmother in the same person, the same character. So yeah, image was key for her and was going to be how we get her across and how we sort of access those different sides of her.
The constraints on women would be, you covered your knee, you covered your shoulders, you would have your head covered in public. Those are things that Mrs. Coulter plays with and breaks. Researching further into Hedy Lamarr, that seemed like a really good fit for Mrs. Coulter. This, 1930s icon, the most beautiful woman in the world, but also this...
Thanks, Caroline. I paid her to say that. Well, it was interesting with Hedy Lamarr because I had a similar idea. We met in a sort of costume department or studio, like in Shad Thames, and I remember it really vividly. And we were discussing who this woman was and what she might look like. And of course, she's incredibly intelligent, Mrs. Coulter. I mean, to get to where she's got to have sort of vast intelligence, and she knows how to use her beauty. She knows how to use those impressions and how to get what she wants, and knows the power of beauty and glamour and image. So someone like Hedy Lamarr was perfect for it. And also, what I loved about Hedy was her middle parting. This is quite... But I always loved the idea that you've got this glamorous woman, but I actually found the centre parting sort of very controlling, or a sort of idea that she has, it's all got to be symmetrical. Everything's got to be perfect. It's all got to align. So I was like, I really want a centre parting. And that's quite difficult to achieve a good look with a centre parting, I have to say, sometimes. But it was really, that's what I loved about it. There's some kind of control element to Mrs. Coulter, that she has to look a certain way and it can't look too free. It's kind of, there is control over it, and it's very manicured and perfected. But there's a softness to her hair. And you see that blue shot? I mean, actually, Caroline designed a whole dress with this in mind, this dress. We loved it from that first meeting, didn't we? And we thought that would be amazing. We've got the green dress in the cocktail party, which kind of was inspired by this dress. But what I loved about her hair as well was the softness and that fluffy nature of the hair that was, even though it was controlled at the center, there's a fluffy, pretty, soft quality that she had to, like I say, attract children, or had to be seen to be soft and sweet and like a princess to these kids. And the jewels, we're talking about all the jewels on the outfits, that they're sparkly and everything's tactile. And the costuming itself, the silks and the furs, it's all, kids want to touch it and feel it. So all that stuff played into how she attracts people, really. And it was a really lovely discussion we had. And that, obviously, the journey of her throughout the 3 seasons completely changes. But yeah, and it reflected in the costumes. but the villainy and, I don't know what the duality of that, I'm not sure, but it's about image for her. Everything's about how she comes across.
The palette of colours was all to do with the Northern Lights, the embroidery on the suit to do with the Northern Lights, and to spark Lyra's interest in you.
Yeah, and there's a kind of, I mean, the materials are soft and shiny and alluring in that way, but the structure of the outfits are often very strong and tailored and powerful. So you could do both those things with that. You could there's a softness, but there's a real strength underneath, and that's also what Mrs Coulter is. So within the magisterium as well, her outfits there are incredibly strong and tailored. So she's a woman in a man's world. Yeah, there's so many.
Sorry, I said, oh, there we go.
There's the first one. That's the first outfit. So that's where I meet meet Lyra for the first time.
Let's start with you, Ruth, the character arc, because it's massive. She, in a way, goes from villain to hero. You need to kind of keep things hidden and not give away, too much. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I knew my end point. There's in the third book, Monkey and her cuddle, and they are reconciled to each other. They accept each other, and they are unified. And so I knew my end point. And also, she does something. She sacrifices her life for. I mean, spoiler alert. But anyway, she does become a hero, by the end. And she does something for her child, which she wouldn't have done before. So she's sort of becomes someone very different in the third season. And her relationship with her monkey is very different as well. So I knew I had to get there, but we needed to sort of push her to the worst place in 2 before we could get there. And so yeah, that was a sort of collaboration and discussion with the writers and with Jack and Jane and Caroline and everyone about how we're going to guide Mrs Coulter through those 3 seasons. And we did see more of Mrs Coulter in the show than we do in the books. We had more time to explore her in some ways. So that gave us more license to kind of explore her more and sort of dig deeper. But it was always interesting with Mrs Coulter. It was like certainly in the first season, to me, there was a lot of public-facing scenes with Mrs Coulter and then domestic home scenes with Mrs Coulter. And that was a way that we could also explore her in that first season. That we sort of see who she is amongst the crowd, in the crowd, at the magisterium with kids, and then who she is at home in her house. And as soon as we walked into the house, which was episode 3, I think, in the first season, I was like, oh, wow, okay, now a lot of it makes sense. I'm in a marble home, and it's very cold, and this perfectly designed house. It looks like a show home. It doesn't feel very homely. There's nothing much personal there. So we had to explore that in the costuming as well, or I wear lots of pajamas. So it's like, okay, what are these pajamas and what are these outfits? What's she like at home on her own in this space? And that was really fun. Mrs Coulter and Lyra, that journey throughout 3 seasons, you probably, I don't know how well planned that was, but it seemed very well thought out. But it was interesting talk about the different, how you related to the 2 characters through costume.
There's an illustration of Lyra, which is Philip Pullman's favourite, which is her running on the rooftops in the red pinafore. And so I wanted that to be how we first saw Lyra. So that became Lyra's colour, really. So red is punctuated throughout the series. I used a sort of petrol blue which was in Mrs Coulter's wardrobe. It's also Boreal, had touches of that in his wardrobe. And then we see more of that in series 3. But then when Mrs Coulter loses Lyra in series 1, you go into red. When Lyra has the opportunity to choose her own clothes in Chutagazze, she wears the petrol blue little jacket. And then, so yeah, there they are, sort of mirroring each other. And again, even though they're sort of worlds apart, mirroring each other in some way, then Mrs Coulter's sort of final outfit from her own world is back so that they are again. And then once we get into series 3, there's more of a silhouette mirroring each other as well.
We did that in the hair and makeup too a bit. I mean, by the end of the 3rd season, I have shorter hair like Daff has and Lyra has in the 1st season. And she's got longer hair and a centre parting by the end. So all of it was well thought out about how we were trying to mirror each other and reflect another story in the costuming and makeup and hair. And very subtly that you guys might not notice, but that's what we was going into. Loads of people went into deep thought about how to make this work.
Yeah.
And what we were saying about Monkey earlier was that there's a sense, I always felt that Mrs Coulter's villainy I always felt that she had these demons are kind of like the animal side of them and the soul, and hers is monkey. So I always felt like I quite wanted Mrs Coulter to go monkey when she was in moments of stress and anger or anxiety. And that would be physically. So it would be my hands would change, or if I fought like a monkey. So we had to have outfits that I could move freely to do that. So there's an episode in season 1 where I bash this guy to the ground with my hands and jump on his back, and that's sort of a monkey. I did that sort of monkey-ish.
Yeah.
So I spoke to Caroline, I want to go a bit monkey. That means I can't have anything too tight because I'll rip the trousers. So I need you to give them be a bit baggier, but still look great.
That's monkey, isn't it?
Yes,
that sort of loose wrist kind of physicality.
Yes. So it was like limp wrists and sometimes feet. Monkey's feet would sort of roll out sometimes. So in moments of vulnerability or insecurity or anything, sometimes my feet roll out. So yeah, I would pull in little things like that, which very subtle that no one else would notice really, but just for my own pleasure really on the day. I think it really was beneficial that Monkey didn't speak in some ways, because we had to find a different language that was physical really and was expressing a relationship without words. And so it meant we had to be a lot more creative about who they were. And I always knew that Monkey was the key to Mrs Coulter. She didn't have a way to express her inner thoughts because her Monkey didn't speak. So we had to really work out, you find out who she is through that dynamic. And it's pretty horrific, it's a pretty nasty dynamic. But again, we were thinking that publicly they're a great team. They go out, they manipulate, they know exactly what they're doing. They can run a room, they can sort of do what they need to do. But when they're together on their own in their house, they can't bear each other. And so they're in the opposite ends of the house. And actually that distance from each other makes them both quite depressed and low energy. When they're together, they're like magnets. And so they're highly strung, kind of on it, very focused, very concentrated, but away from each other, they kind of lose their life, I suppose, life force. So we were playing with all those complexities, and I had a brilliant puppeteer called Brian who loved going deep into that world too. So the two of us would work out how to negotiate a room and a scene. Every scene, we'd sort of work it out between us. And the writers wrote things for us because we started finding this dynamic. And adding sort of our own logic to who she was, or rationale to who she was, in subtle ways again, that would never overly explain anything, but would slightly suggest something. And that would be our own theories, not necessarily Philip's, but it would be our own that we've sort of put in there.
An internal logic to
Yeah,
it.
and a rationale and a sort of psychology as to why she does what she does. So it was great fun doing that, but it does come out in the costumes because again, it was like the colours. Some of that blue on the monkey's face comes out in my outfits. And that first outfit, that blue there, that sort of definitely got some blue in the face of the monkey. And so Caroline really knew that they're a great team. The way they look too is key. There's certainly things, when we've got a great scene, that purple dress has got a key story, which was written in as, again, spoiler alert, but we're here, aren't we? So sorry. It's my mother's dress, or it came from my mother, delivered to me by my mother, or it comes in a big trunk. And I have a particular dislike for my mother. So it gives a suggestion that actually a lot of this imagery that Mrs. Coulter has lived her life, has always, these outfits that she's been in have kind of somehow been, I don't know, impressed upon her by her mother. in some way. Because the time at which we see Mrs Coulter get into this dress, she's now in very different clothes. She's in a softer jumper and trousers and flat shoes. So the contrast of getting back into the Mrs Coulter dress and the association with her mother suggests a whole other storyline that we've not seen on the screen. So it's things like that which are really enticing and interesting, that you can drop little clues.
I chose the purple as a kind of ecclesiastical colour that she would have chosen, but also it's meant to kind of encapsulate all of Mrs Coulter's wardrobe before, little details from it, the classic pencil skirt, the high little bit. We also wanted to have this slit because of the locket, so we could see that she's wearing the locket with Lyra's hair, the strong shoulder, and her mother would probably have packed some beautiful hat that she should have worn in Geneva in the magisterium, but that Mrs Coulter was not going to do that. She's so glamorous, but you're not provocative. You're not showing anything. It's not about showing leg or you're covered up. It's.
But in that world, a little goes a long way. So I could show an ankle or a wrist, and sends everyone in. This job across the board has been a really collaborative process, and I will miss it. It's been a privilege of my career to play this part, and with the people creating Mrs Coulter. The team, Caroline, Brian, Russ, everyone involved in creating the monkey as much as Mrs Coulter. And it's really rare to find people that are trusted to do their work and passionate to continue the work and continue exploring who these people are. And look, we had great source material. I mean, the books are fantastic and the characters are amazing. And even rereading it again, you're like, wow, what a privilege to be able to dig deep into these characters. So yeah, it's quite rare to find teams like that work for 4 years, 5 years we've been on it. So my favorite season, I think it might have to be the first season, just because it was establishing who she was, and we had so many brilliant coats and fabulous green dress, and everything at Bolvanger, that brilliant coat. I think probably the first season, but I mean, all of them have been fantastic. But that's probably my favourite, costume-wise.
No, I will always get this wrong. Yes. But yes.
And me.
Yeah. We could never remember what finger the rings went on, because I decided that you had a sort of magisterium ring on one hand, and you did continue to wear a wedding ring. But
did I lose it at some point? I don't think I had it in the third season, did I?
No, you didn't.
Might be a continuity issue, but I can't remember. I can't remember I don't know if I did wear the wedding band. I think I just wore the magisterium band. And we kept getting confused as to which side of which hand it should go on. And we thought, that looks like a wedding band, and they put it on the right finger. Anyway, it was a long conversation. In terms of Mrs Coulter, I call her Mrs C, but it's funny, isn't it? I never call her Marissa. Never call her by her first name. And I think she's always mentioned, that's how she's written in the book, and that's how everyone refers to her, and it gives her such sort of weird power as well, and slightly anonymous and not familiar. She's very, official.
Well, the course is built in, or is you're just figure that fabulous?
I figure that fabulous, darling. No, I think, do we have any corsets?
No, we didn't. We didn't. I think that's what's sort of interesting about how we didn't, if they were sort of 30s, 40s outfits, they'd have much more heavy tailoring within them, and they'd be kind of harder to wear and more restrictive, and it's very soft tailoring.
And that's the great, maker of Dee. She just fit to my body. They were made all for me, so she just cut them really well. That made them look great. I never knew how much went on, or how much it took, and how many different skilled workers there are on a TV show like this. And I remember when my mum first came to see Jane Eyre, and she's here tonight, and she hadn't quite, no one knows how like all the different people involved. But you can be part of the industry in very many different capacities, and it's a finding where you like what excites you the most, and so it might not just be acting. There might be some other avenue within it. So keep your eyes peeled, because there's loads of opportunities within the industry.
Do you want or get to keep any of them, Ruth?
I need to talk to you about that, actually. There's a few jackets I want. You promised me one.
Yeah, but Chris has everything under
Oh,
lock and
Chris
key.
has got it all. Right, Chris. Okay, I'm coming over. Raiding it.